Good morning or hello, everybody. Welcome to our extended conversation from CyNam 22.1. I'm Reid Derby, one of the directors at CyNam, and I was hosting a panel session on ecosystems on the 10th. I'm delighted to welcome Monika and Katie from the panel to join me today. Monika and Katie, would you like to just introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you for re-inviting me back, Reid. My name is Monika Radclyffe. I am the Director of Innovation Programs at Plexal, and Plexal is an innovation company that focuses on government-led innovation.
And hi, everyone. I'm Katie Muldoon. I'm the founder and director of Yellowrattle Coaching. I help people who are shaping the future. So in this cyber tech industry, I love working with people here. And a little bit on why it's Yellowrattle. Yellowrattle is a plant that is scattered when other plants can't grow. And so when you scatter Yellowrattle, you can create a meadow of lots of other flowers. And those are the type of leaders I want to be working with.
Amazing. Well, it's so lovely to have you back. On the event itself, it was a tremendous evening. If you haven't seen that, I do recommend you going back and having a look on YouTube. We only had 20 minutes for our panel, and there were so many questions that came in, and we just felt that we wanted to extend the time. So this is really an opportunity in a slightly more relaxed environment to just talk through and answer some of those questions. So thank you for joining. So the first question we'll start off was actually about Cheltenham, and it was about the T-shirt that I was wearing, which I've got here. I will just sort of show you. It says, move beyond the helix. And there were a number of T-shirts. I think we had about 6 printed. And somebody said, well, what is this? What is Reid's cryptic T-shirt? What does it mean? And then a related question, what does Cheltenham have that can make a difference to the world of tech? So the T-shirt was actually part of a manifesto that a few of us created. We went to Helsinki to Slush with a bunch of companies and people from our ecosystem to try and understand, what's at the core and the heart of what we're about in a cyber tech ecosystem. And we wanted to, I guess we looked at a lot of the sort of theory of innovation and entrepreneurship. And, one of those is this idea of a helix where you've got government and industry and academia and investors working together. We absolutely buy into the need to bring these stakeholders together. Part of it, though, is about moving beyond that theoretical model to, in practice, how do we actually create new value, new products, new services, solving problems? And so part of what we want to do is to be able to lean forward and actually create that future for ourselves and for our communities. And so it was slightly tongue-in-cheek. It was, a bit playful. And yeah, sorry that didn't really come across. Maybe we'll do something special on that. So that was the first question. And about Cheltenham. I mean, I guess I don't know whether Katie or Monika wanted to say anything specifically about Cheltenham and about the ecosystem that we've got. Any reflections on that? Monika?
Yes, certainly. I got some reflections. So I'm still fairly new to Plexal. I've joined about 3 months ago. So I've been really focusing over the last few months on getting to know the Cheltenham ecosystem. And what I'm finding is that it's really unique. As you said, there's always different stakeholders that play roles within the ecosystem, and there's this triple helix, and there's so much more beyond that. But I think what's really interesting and unique in Cheltenham is that a very active role that the government is playing in the ecosystem here, as well as the very strong emerging startup ecosystem. I think that combined creates a really unique combination of very exciting elements that form the foundations of the ecosystem. And from then, hopefully, the rest follows. So we're already working on attracting more investors into the city, with previous entrepreneurs who then become mentors to the next generation of startups. So I think that the foundations are there, and I'm just really looking forward to getting engaged even more and seeing how that develops.
That's really interesting, Monika. No, thanks for that. Katie, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think there's a really lovely aspect about Cheltenham, which is through the sort of ancient concept really of festival. And so when we have things like the Science Festival, the Jazz Festival, all sorts of different things, which is a time for celebration, one of the things that actually underpins success is actually the cyber tech industry, making sure that people can buy tickets online, making sure that things are cyber secure. But actually, one of the things that we can do here in Cheltenham is demonstrate the relevance of the industry so brilliantly across so many different aspects that make being human great and being in a community. So I think that Cheltenham, because of its, because how much it loves to celebrate stuff, and the Cheltenham races are also a celebration as well. You know, everything's about celebration, and I think that's a really wonderful way that we can meet as communities in all the different systems that work to make Cheltenham great. So I think actually the ingredients of the town is wonderful. So go Cheltenham.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's great. And I suppose the size as well. What we've got, just less than 120,000 people. There is an intimacy there, but it does obviously feed into broader regions in Gloucestershire and the Southwest and across the UK. Brilliant. Well, let's move on. Another big theme that came up in the evening was one of diversity, and I know Priya, who did our keynote, which was excellent, talked a lot about that and ecosystems, and the panel discussion that we had at the end with the apprentices was tremendous. So I guess the first question, how do we encourage diversity in our ecosystem or any ecosystem that has sort of tech? And I guess specifically, how do we encourage people from diverse backgrounds that don't already have access to what we've got? Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I think a large part of it's probably there's a little bit of demystifying, which lots of people are doing fantastic stuff on. So although it's a cyber tech industry, you don't actually need to be technical to work in the cyber tech industry. So when you're in the very early stages of value propositions and ideation, actually it's all different experiences that make it brilliant. And so I would say that there's lots and lots of opportunities for people to come and join activities in the cyber tech industry and be part of a journey that creates something. And also things like no code, which is becoming more and more popular. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. Who will walk past us a few times, I think. You have things like no code. So things are actually barriers are being broken down all the time for who can engage in the tech industry. That would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is, and this is what I see Cheltenham doing really well, is being present in areas that aren't notionally about cyber tech and showing the roles that they play in other industries. So showing the relevance, just being part of everyday life. So it's not something that other people do, it's something that we all do. And so again, it's being relevant would probably be, those would be the two things I'd probably start with.
Really interesting, yeah. I was really reflecting as well, speaking to Florence from Lives of Colour, who came to the event on the 10th. I mean, I don't think she had really previously engaged with cyber tech, and it was just great for her to be introduced to the community, and hopefully, great things will come. Monika, any thoughts from you?
Yes, certainly diversity inclusion is a topic I'm very passionate about and have been working on for years, having been so ingrained in the tech industry. And I think there's two points I'd like to raise. One is around diversity is a systemic failure, so it's hard to address over a short term. But what we have to think about is the whole next generation that we can influence in terms of what choices that they make. And a great example of a program that works really, really well is a Cyber First program that NCSC champions, and it's just such a fantastic initiative. And it starts for children as young as 12 years old. So if you got, any nephews, nieces, or friends that have children at this age, please do encourage them to join the program. Last summer, there were 1,700 participants that joined the program, and 47% of them were ethnic minorities, and 43% were women or girls. So it's a fantastically well diverse program, and it just really shows like at this age there's very few stereotypes and diversity barriers, and they're just all interested. So we should really encourage that, and try to get as many children interested in cyber so they can then choose that as their career. And a second point that I'd like to make is just to encourage to get people to think outside of a box. Because if we think of a typical startup ecosystem, it's very much white and male dominated. But then what happens is just a series of coincidences. You tend to have one entrepreneur that comes up with an idea and he gets his mate to join him as a co-founder, and then they get more friends to join as a team. And then eventually, it's only when they get to a certain number of people they realize, oh gosh, we're all the same. We're all from the same environment. And just because we're all friends, we work together, it just happened. So just thinking more consciously about how can you create a more inclusive and diverse culture from early on. And that includes things like, when you start employing people and you start your first ever job description, just get someone to read through it and just check from that, diversity lens, because you may be using a language that is, it's all about kind of a strong, ambitious, masculine culture. And if you can get some people to read through it and remove that language that may cause some barriers, you can actually suddenly open up to a lot more applicants that wouldn't consider that role. And also just thinking about who you can attract to your business. You may be thinking, okay, university graduates, yes, but maybe an apprentice could do the same job, or maybe it could be attracting a woman who had a career break and is looking to get back into job and would have the skills that you're looking for. So it's just about being a bit more open-minded and also being more inclusive in the way how you approach building your team early on.
I mean, that sounds really interesting. I mean, I guess I reflect on this, as a sort of white male, standard in the industry. My diversity comes from my background, from being a very sort of working class background. Parents both left school at 14, and also my neurodiversity. I think having ADHD, some diversity is not visible. But I think the other point that you made there around sort of systems is that conscious intention and not trying to sort of overly engineer things, but just asking the questions, like when we have panels, just asking, why is this going to be an all male panel, or why is it all white, or, trying to sort of just do something and having the hope that these things do change. And we've seen that in our own ecosystem, it is changing. So yeah, brilliant. I mean, I think that's probably covered the three questions that we had on diversity, and I guess we could go beyond cyber and talk about other technologies and so on. But it sounds like that there's a lot already going on, that we're making progress, but there's a lot more to do. The next big area of questions I wanted to move on to was about working with government. And Monika, you mentioned that in Cheltenham we've got quite a lot of really interesting government connections, and as well as sort of startups and SMEs. So I suppose the first question was really, it says, right, if there was one thing that the big tech companies could do to help small companies and customers access emerging technology, what would that be? I mean, I guess that was thinking about big companies working with government, but I guess it's how can the large tech companies who are working with government help smaller companies to access the ecosystem? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I think it's a very difficult question and a very difficult situation, because what I often find is that those institutions, so large corporates, governments, and startups, they speak completely different language, and it's very hard for them to communicate with each other and to even initially find each other, because they just don't operate in each other's spheres. And that's where having someone who facilitates that ecosystem really helps. So that's the role we play with. We at Plexal play when working with government organizations or big corporates. We act as that kind of translator and facilitator. And I think it really helps to have someone who has visibility into different stakeholder groups and understands the language and ways of working in order to connect with each other. And I think great example of this is the NCC for Startups program we're running. So it's an accelerated program where we work with the authority to define challenges that the country is facing. And most recent one was around ransomware. And then we go out to scout for startups that are addressing this challenge and have got interesting technical solutions that could provide solutions. And then we bring them together on a program. We provide them with lots of business support, but that's when we facilitate the introductions between the government and the startups, and that's when we bring the corporates in. They act as mentors, they act as sort of they provide guidance, but eventually we also hope that they will end up working with those startups as well.
That's really good. So maybe if there's any small to medium enterprises on watching who would like to know more, they can get in touch with you, Monika at Plexal, just to find out more about that, the language and the contracts and sort of how things work, because I know that's quite tricky. Excellent. Katie, if I could turn to you. So we also had on the panel James Gavin from the MOD. I know that you've got a background working in MOD. One of the questions we had here again was for SMEs, small to medium enterprises, working directly with the MOD. And I think this came from someone in an SME. We always find it a challenge to innovate quickly with organizations like DSTL, the Defence Science Technologies Lab, and DASA, which is the MOD accelerator, and their frameworks. How can we better inform the MOD on how we actually accelerate technology? So it was really about innovation and defence and SMEs. I mean, Katie, any thoughts specifically on MOD? I know James has got some comments which I'll mention as well. But Katie.
So I think a good thing about MOD is it's learning lots. So it's always trying to continually improve how it engages, and some of the things that are taking time is it's kind of like the value chain of getting early stage technology into the hands of the user. Now, that's one of the biggest gripes of the user. They want the early stage technology. They don't want something retrofitted. They want something that was designed for them. So the needs of the end user actually match probably the needs of the startups. It's getting the bit in between that correct. And there's lots of things that are there for the right reasons. But the ecosystem in the MOD is enormous. It's huge. And there's lots of things in place which are there, as I say, for the right reasons. And checking the compliance things, checking the technology readiness levels of things. So I would say it's in progress and it's continually improving. And there's lots of different entry points in, but I'd say it's still pretty hard to get it in there, but I'd say keep trying. And lots of different aspects of the MOD. And I'd also widen it from MOD to the sort of national security landscape. There's lots of stuff that's actually happening to open more angles for people, to open more diverse startups. So I'd say stay tuned. It's getting better, is what I'd say.
No, that's really helpful. So I suppose if you're a small company, it can be a bit daunting, and to know how am I going to get a contract, or how am I going to be able to serve and to help. Going back to Monika's point about language. But that's really helpful. So it is worth sticking at these. And you're saying things are getting better. So James, who sends his apologies, wasn't able to make the call. He gave us some thoughts afterwards. He recommended companies engaging directly with the DASA regional advisors. If you Google DASA MOD, you should find those. And you will get some good help and advice for starting a journey in the MOD innovation ecosystem. For MOD, DES, DE&S, I mean, that's a vast area. Joining Futures Labs via EDP Aurora would be a good start. Again, you can probably Google that. That will highlight some of the challenges that the MOD are looking to address and what are the sort of paid routes to contribute. Other things, there's an organization called AFCEA, and AFCEA UK. Again, if you Google AFCEA UK, and we had some AFCEA members at the CyNam event, AFCEA West, and you can find the next event as a good way of networking into MOD and MOD suppliers. And finally, James is encouraging folks to look at the Tech UK website and the defence programme, and also Team Defence Information. So that's mainly digital focused trade bodies that the MOD uses to engage with SMEs and the wider industry. So there's plenty there, but I'm sure there's more work to be done. Excellent. So that was sort of, I guess, the sort of working with government and MOD in particular. I'd like to move us on to talk a bit more about the sort of ecosystem and mixing and integration across silos, because clearly we've got lots of silos in the UK and even locally. So maybe if I could come to you again, Monika, what would you say is the single most important factor in breaking down the silos between those different sort of sectors to help the ecosystem thrive?
A conversation. I think that's the most important single factor is the communication. So anything that helps facilitate communication, conversation across those different silos helps. So for example, CyNam events. I think that was the event we all went to. That was an excellent example of one that really is breaking those silos and really breaking down those barriers, and then allows those different groups to talk to each other in a very relaxed and comfortable setting. So anything that we can do to create more opportunities like that. And, we have to think widely. So we now have an opportunity to host virtual events, enable conversations online, but also in person. So I'd like to encourage as much of that as possible.
No, that's really good. So that building trust and providing opportunities for conversation. I was reflecting afterwards on the event. I was chatting to a friend of mine who's a teacher who came along, and he saw all this incredible networking going on, but he felt slightly on the edge. And it was really interesting to think, what can we do to actually build in that openness to people that maybe find it a bit intimidating, or they don't speak the jargon and the language. And there is something about always trying to be open and find the ways of encouraging conversation. I mean, Katie, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, when it comes to sort of inclusion, a really important aspect is actually, I think, about agency. So people, we don't make assumptions on behalf of anyone. And so sometimes people, I've seen you can put a sticker on that says, "Hi, I'm open to new introductions." One that, green one that says, "I'm just listening, thank you." Things like this, where you pick your sticker or you pick a glass or a cup or something that says, "I'm a teacher." You just write on it, "I'm this, I'm interested in meeting people." It's something that just says a little bit of communication between an audience that doesn't know one another, and it just helps people move in between. And that's one thing. There's also another thing, which is when you have a large group, you can put people into smaller groups, and then you can do a small facilitation of moving people around stalls or something like that. And when people are in smaller groups, it's slightly easier to chat. So there's things you can do. And again, it's always about opting in. So other people can just stand by and do what they would like to do. But important to allow people choice and make no assumptions on their behalf.
That sounds really good. One of the other questions in that sort of space was around, again, reflecting on the event. The question was, the majority of the people here at the event will be from a technology or a military or government background. That was the assumption. So the key question was, how do we create an environment where people from all industries and a broader set of society are welcome to contribute? So how do we go beyond our sort of bubble?
It's tricky, but also I really agree with Katie in terms of just being inclusive, because I think just there could be an assumption that everyone here is from a tech industry, but if there was one teacher, there could be 10 other teachers that are out there that just haven't had a chance to talk to each other. So I think just persevere and try to attend multiple events. Attending one event is not going to make a difference. You make initial introduction, you make initial connections, but it's really about building that trust and building relationships that makes a difference. So if you keep coming to the events over and over, and after a second, third, or fourth event, you start meeting the same people, then it gets easier, because suddenly you don't have people that you know in a room. It's much easier to initiate that conversation, but also ask those people for further introductions. So I think that's a really good tip when you come into an event and you feel like, okay, I don't really know people here. Whoever you speak to, just ask them to introduce you to the next person. So hopefully that will make that transition easier. And yeah, you'd be surprised that you actually may find that there are people like you in a room, and you create a nice network. It's also a good practice to just go out of your comfort zone and try networking events that are maybe not in your sector, not in your industry, just trying different set of people, and just to expand your horizons and expand your connections.
I remember the first. Go on, Katie.
Oh, sorry, Reid. I just sort of I'm really enthused with what Monika is saying, is what, because there's the way I think that you get lots of people into a room that wouldn't necessarily be in a room together is those cross-sector challenges. So if you had something like digital fashion, something which people had a great idea in fashion maybe, but they wanted to know how do you go about that? It's you bring the groups together. It's that kind of thing, with no expectations of a great solution or anything, but a great conversation. And so I think it's about breaking down barriers around ideas and concepts and just bringing people together on cross-sector challenges.
I mean, I think that's something that we will have a lot of opportunity to do in Cheltenham. I mean, you mentioned about the festivals, Katie. As you know, one of the things that we're really keen to do is to bring together creative sector with tech, and that's already starting to happen in places like Hub 8, and I hopefully in the summer at the Science Festival we'll see some more of that. We've got the Jazz Festival coming up, and that it's sort of it's counterintuitive in some ways, to sort of step back, but yeah, so I think there's plenty of opportunity there for reaching out to other sectors and looking at problems in different ways, or opportunities. And because we say everything is cyber, everything is digital these days, and that can be meaningless, but actually also when you start to look at it, it can be quite interesting. One other point on the integration then, our question was about, I think, within organizations or looking at breaking down barriers. How do you know any organizations that are particularly good at breaking down barriers and improving inclusion? Any examples locally or more generally?
Well, I'll be honest, I think you guys are genuinely. When you invited me into Hub 8 and to meet the team, that was my impression, was welcoming, and thoughts and ideas matter. And when you do your outreach, it's one of those ones which is fantastic. It's not linked to, well, I don't think it's linked to sort of profit targets and all this sort of stuff. It's done because it's the right thing to do. And when a company leads with purpose, profits will come. And so when you're leading by example, so when you have like a parent that's overlooking the ecosystem, that's role modeling the behaviors, you'll develop the ecosystem in that fashion. So yeah, I'd say well done to you guys, and and I mean guys in generic terms, I mean all genders in that. But yeah, that's genuinely the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are very lucky. I mean, CyNam as a community interest company and not for profit, it's sort of baked into the DNA. So we're very lucky to be in that position where we're not there to make a ton of money. Absolutely, we need to pay our way, and we do need sponsorship and income in order to pay for all the amazing stuff that happens. But we do it with community objectives at heart. Even if those objectives might end up with other companies making lots of money, if it's for the right reasons, then that's great. So yeah, I think that's really good to hear. Thank you. I mean, Monika, any other organizations that you can think of that are particularly good at breaking down barriers?
Yes, sure. Yes, CyNam for sure. So I agree. Great organization. I perhaps just want to do a shout out to one of the startups that I met last week at a Cyber Runway event in Manchester. It's called Caps Lock. And what they do, I think, 16-week courses in cyber for anyone. So anyone who's interested in getting into industry and would like to just upskill themselves to change their career. they can go on one of the caps lock courses. And I think that's really amazing example of being inclusive, that, you know, wherever you come from, you can get on the course and start a new career. And those courses are also funded by large organizations. So there's big corporates that then sponsor that, so enable people to get into the industry. So caps lock as one example of being a very inclusive startup.
And that sounds really good. I mean, you mentioned Manchester. I suppose one of the questions that we often get is, you know, why should we just focus on Cheltenham? And, you know, I suppose part of the what we want to do is to help do what we can for other areas and look at how we mix and integrate with other localities. I guess with being more digital as well, that there's an opportunity to do things across different regions, as well as to travel and visit. And it's really great that Plexal, you're working in Manchester, in London, in Cheltenham, and more generally. And I think the more that we can do to cross-fertilize different ecosystems, the better. And to do it in a way where it's not a zero-sum game. It's that, you know, we're looking at creating a better future for everybody. So moving on, if we can, I think we're well over halfway. We've got a few more questions though, and a few more topics. I suppose the next one is really about investment and investors, and that's something that we've only, I suppose, really started to think about in Cheltenham probably in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. What would you both say is the role that investors have in the growth of ecosystems? It might be quite obvious, but, you know, it'd be really good to get your sense. Monika, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. I think there's this sort of preconception that investors are only there to provide money. I think they can do so much more, especially for early stage investment opportunities. You know, if you're just starting up and looking for an angel investment, so someone who will put maybe like 20 or 50 or 100K into your business, those people are using their own money to invest. So they're very much emotionally invested in what they do. So what they're looking for is they want to find a startup that is the right fit in terms of what the startup is trying to achieve, their purpose, the values, the mission. And they also personally believe in entrepreneurs. But then if that match is successful, they can add so much value to the business, you know, acting as a mentor, as an advisor, and a connector. So I think there's so much more you can get out of investment than just beyond money. And even at further stages, when you start thinking about the next round of funding, Series A, you're looking for VC investment. Again, those funds have got so much expertise inside their teams. You know, they work with hundreds of startups, help them grow. So it's also about using their connections to help you scale the business. You know, whether you're looking to recruit people or get connected to people within the industry, they can add so much value just beyond the capital.
So really, you're you know, when you take investment, you're getting a relationship with an investor, and they're real people too, who might have their own sort of mission and purpose. Katie, any thoughts?
I think, you know, Monika's sort of got the whole thing absolutely nailed in terms of what investors can do, and I think it also they will help sort of influence the culture of the startup as well. And so investors who recognise care for the founders and recognising it's a tough journey, and that there's a human who's trying to create something new or better for people. The way that they interact, the way they communicate, will influence the way that the founders do, and when they scale as well, what they prioritize and value. I think the investors can really shape that. So, you know, responsibility from the investors, what they do, how they promote themselves, etc., is all really, really important, and will help build a great ecosystem for us.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot more we need to do to sort of uncover and explain the mechanics of these types of things, you know, including investment, but also, and you know, how do you do a startup? You know, how do you get into this? We have a lot of people in our ecosystem, a lot of technical experts, you know, that maybe have never really worked in a startup environment, and they might be afraid or just have no idea that it's something that they could do. And I suppose that's something we're thinking about CyNam. What can we do to help more founders get started? It's like, you read a lot of the government innovation strategies and science and technology. I spent the last week, as you know, reading some of these papers, and at the heart of that is that, where do startup founders come from?
Well, but this is a really important question, Reid, actually, because in the UK, there's a really big cultural problem with the courage it takes to do something, because if your startup is not successful, or you have a financial issue with it, you pretty much get punished in the UK. In America, you don't. So people are encouraged to have secure jobs. They're encouraged to be non-risk takers. And with what we're trying to do in the UK in terms of entrepreneurship, we need to change the system, and that's way outside of our ability. But we need to change the system as to what it means to take risk, and we're getting the structure for support. But sometimes it doesn't go right, and that shouldn't be held against the founder for the rest of their lives. So that thing has to change primarily, but also there's definitely a space for some sort of matchmaking, because I think there's people everywhere with great ideas that they can't do anything with it because they don't know how to code. And actually, there's people who love coding that would love to solve a problem. So I think there's heaps of opportunities, and that's where that diversity comes in. That's where those opportunities come in, and things like you could do that all the way from schools, but also things like all the way into prisons, things where people have been stuck with labels. Well, actually, maybe they're entrepreneurs. Maybe they're actually really smart and just need trust and support and encouragement. And just, again, don't block people out. Bring people in.
So maybe we need a dating agency for startup founders. I don't know whether we need to do some sort of event to just talk about. So you think you might be interested in doing a startup?
Yeah.
So there could be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Just what do you do if you've got an idea?
Yeah. And Monika, sort of in our sector, in cybersecurity and cyber tech and national security and whatever, is there a sort of stereotype of people who get into these areas because they like security and low risk? And is there a sort of almost a paradox between the sector and startups, or is that just a myth? What do you think?
I think there's so many myths in the whole startup ecosystem. I think the biggest one of all is that sort of stereotypical entrepreneur is a 20-something, a male coming out of university like Zuckerberg. But actually, that is it's not true. A typical entrepreneur is actually in their 40s, and they have worked in an industry, and maybe they got frustrated with being in a job, or maybe they just found a problem they would like to solve that they've observed in their workplace, and there isn't an opportunity for their organization to solve that problem, and they realize I could do this, I could solve this problem, and I could launch this as a business. And they either start moonlighting, or they leave their jobs or go part-time and start creating something on the side, and then that grows. And at that stage, they already have really good industry connections, and actually it's a much better position to launch a business. But obviously that doesn't apply to everyone. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. I think you just have to think about that they're everywhere. Your corner shop owner is an entrepreneur, right? So let's not limit ourselves to our way of thinking of who the typical entrepreneurs are.
Great. We've got, I think, 5-10 minutes left. I've got there's one other question. I want to get onto you to talk about Ukraine before we finish, because that's really important. But one other question, it's slightly left field. It says, as the demand for infosec research increases with interconnected devices, what is the scope for collaboration among these researchers? So that, I think it's a sort of a more technical question around, I suppose, Internet of Things, smart devices. Is there a place for collaboration across these sort of research communities? Where would you go to even do this sort of thing?
Good question.
Maybe turning that round. If you ask the question, maybe you're part of the solution. So whoever asked the question, maybe you need to go and actually find out, and is there a research community for smart devices and security? I know that there are various organizations like Connected Places, Catapult. There are researchers involved in Internet of Things and smart devices. Is there a community? Is there anything local? I don't know. But maybe there's a gap in the market there. And whether that's for pure research or for startups or for something else, I don't know. But maybe that's a topic for another day.
Just to add to that, I mean, it also depends like what kind of researcher are you. If you're an academic researcher, I mean, definitely go and speak with your own university, because there are networks set up between universities to help those researchers come together. And equally, there are organizations like you mentioned, Connect, Catapult, and others that help to kind of bring people together for joint bids and joint research projects. So definitely worth exploring that.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends on what do you want to do with the research. Is it to publish papers? Is it to create a business? What's the purpose of it? So that's probably all we can say on that. Right. So before we finish, I think we had a few questions in about Ukraine, and clearly as we speak, we've got this terrible war, and it is absolutely tragic what is going on, and a lot of people in our ecosystem, they want to know what to do. So I guess the first question was really, how do we use our breadth, our power and privilege as a community to join up and reach out, for Ukraine in particular? What can we do? Any particular things that you've seen that people can get involved in?
Well, I'd say, Reid, there's a thing about the industry and how it listens to customers. And there are fantastic organizations out there that are doing brilliant things. And I would be reaching out to the organizations that are supporting the refugees and asking if there's anything that this sector can do to help. So, if you've got a product or a service, you listen to the customer, you adapt, you develop features, you do things like that. I'd be using exactly the same methodology here, except going out to the organizations that are doing brilliant stuff out there and using the skills and people of the sector to support their missions. Brilliant.
No, thanks, Katie. Monika, anything from you?
Yes, sure. Just thinking about, it's horrible, horrible times, and there's just so much that we can all do individually, but it depends on, individual capacity to do things. But just thinking about the technology sector, so many of the jobs that are created in startups are now remote or virtual first. Perhaps encouraging other businesses and other startups to make those roles available across Europe and Ukraine, so that refugees can apply and do those jobs remotely, and that and it creates opportunities for them to bring income into their households. So that's one idea, and another one is just supporting Ukrainian businesses. There's just so many Ukrainian startups actually that are quite well known. So, for example, Grammarly. If you are using Grammarly as a free subscription, consider upgrading that to a paying subscription. That will help their business and eventually their economy. There's so many others like GitLab or Inc. that come from Ukraine as well.
Amazing! I had no idea Grammarly was from Ukraine. That's really interesting. One of the companies in our ecosystem locally I was chatting to them last week. They have a researcher in Ukraine who's still working in cybersecurity, and unbelievable. Just it's incredible that they're still able to work. Thoughts and prayers are with all the people of Ukraine and the refugees. And again, if anybody's listening and they want to sort of lean in, there's lots of things you can do. There's clearly you can donate your money to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, Disasters Emergency Committee, donations.dec.org.uk. You'll be helping to provide food, water, shelter, healthcare for refugees and displaced families. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do there. But Monika and Katie, really great ideas there. So as we wrap things up, just wondered if either of you had any sort of final points about the event or about the future in the ecosystem. Katie?
Just, I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. It's brilliant. I hope to be part of more events and meeting more people, because I think you're doing great stuff. And I hope to also see it also connect around the UK, because that's going to, with all the other sort of cyber clusters, because that's going to be really important for resilience in the future as well. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what's coming next.
Excellent, thank you. Monika?
And equally for me, I'm just really grateful to have been invited to speak at the CyNam event, and now this follow-up discussion. So happy there's been so many questions that we could answer, and I'd love to just continue that conversation and communication. So if anyone would like to follow up with any questions or have a chat, I'm here, happy to help and answer those.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both, Monika and Katie, for your time, and thank you to Elle for organising this session. I know she's listening in the background. And for those of you listening online, watching online, if there's something that you would like to see us do that's different, another tech showcase, another event, if you're curious, if you've got some ideas, please do get in touch. You can email us info@cynam.org. That's info@cynam.org. We will have our next big flagship event in the summer, hopefully around the same time as the Science Festival in Cheltenham. But there's loads of other stuff happening in between, and yeah, online as well. So thank you for your time, and we will see you in the future. Have a nice day.
Thank you.